Oh, it is officially 1 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us for the first ever virtual webinar as a tour of the food forest. So my name is Doni Nolan, although I go by Doni, and I work as the Greenhouse and Gardens Program Manager for the Office of Sustainability at George Mason. So with me, I have only 2 out of 4 of my staff on the Greenhouse and Gardens team. In no particular order, I'll introduce Lynn Ruffa. She recently joined us. She was previously an intern, and she works as the Greenhouse and Gardens team leader, and she will also be hosting the slideshow today. Lynn, you want to say hi? Oh, we can't hear you. You're still on mute.
There we go. Hi, everyone. Even before I learned about this program, I was drawn to the food forest. I just wandered through it one day and I sat down. It was just gorgeous, and it's just such a pretty part of campus, and it's awesome to learn more.
Awesome, thank you. And we also have Riss Bethke, who's been one of my staff for a couple of years now, and he would typically host the food forest volunteer shifts. So he's already very familiar with what we're going through today, but he's also playing a supporting role for this webinar today. And both of these students are also graduating, so congratulations. Riss, you want to say hello?
Yeah, sure. Hi. I've been working for the office for about 2 years now, and the food forest has always had a special place in my heart. I really love hanging out there and volunteering and being with the plants. So I'm really glad that we're able to make it more available to people through this virtual tour.
Me too. Thank you so much. So not with us today, I have Hala and Alexa as well. And they help me manage the greenhouse and gardens on campus too. They had a couple of family emergencies today, so they're not able to join us. So we're going to go ahead and get started. We can go to the next slide. And so you'll hear me say next slide. That's because Lynn is hosting the slides. I will tell you in advance. I live out in the middle of nowhere in the country, so my internet connection is fairly poor, and that's why I'm hosting just my video in my Airstream trailer right now, and then I have my staff Lynn hosting the slides. So you'll hear me say next slide. If my voice ever cuts out, please use the chat box to let me know if there are any issues. I might need to shut down my video and just host my audio if needed, although it seems like my video is working. So please be patient with me, and thank you. So welcome to the Innovation Food Forest. I'm going to pretend like we are actually on site in the heart of campus near Innovation Hall and also near the basement of the Johnson Center. So the purpose of the Food Forest is to grow food for the public that anybody can come, walk into the garden, and pick and enjoy the food for free. That is the main goal of this site. Most people have never tasted fresh food before, and it changed my life. Fresh food is amazing, super delicious, really nutritious, and absolutely beautiful, and it's available right on campus for anybody. And then our other mission is also to educate people on sustainable food sources. So a lot of this food is produced with even a negative carbon footprint, because these plants are actually fixing carbon, taking it out of the atmosphere and storing it into the food. And so this is like the most sustainable way to grow food, and I'll tell you more about it. There's also a ton of medicinal herbs I will go into as well. So the next slide, I'm first going to talk about the history of the site, let you know how it actually got started. So there was originally a permaculture design certification course that got started in 2012, and it was managed by one of our previous staff, Danielle Wyman Castellano. She's almost famous on in our office because she started so many projects, including both gardens and the greenhouse. I was one of her student staff when I was younger. So she led me through getting all this started and my career as well. She is in fact back on campus teaching as a adjunct faculty. So that's really exciting. So she started this course, which was a week-long intensive course. It was 72 hours of classroom in 1 week during spring break. And it was open to the public, so you didn't have to be registered as a student with Mason. It was fairly expensive. Now, we did fly in Wayne Wiseman, permaculture expert from the Midwest, to teach the class. So I took it in 2012, and then I also helped to manage it in 2014. So here's the flyer that I made just to give you a sense of it. It's a super fun class, really intense, learning everything about permaculture. So permaculture is a word formed by two words, permanent and agriculture. So we're using permanent landscapes, perennial plants to grow food. So permaculture was coined in the 80s by Bill Mollison. And I'm going to go more into explain permaculture because that's really the inspiration for creating this garden. So next slide, please. So after the course in 2012, one of the students, along with me when I was taking it, her name was Elizabeth Torrance. And as part of the class, we actually chose a site on campus and made a landscape design proposal. Of course, assuming that it probably would never actually get implemented, but just to practice what we were learning. But Elizabeth Torrance had a special role because not only was she a student at Mason and at the permaculture design course, but she was also a former facility staff. So she had some connections with the landscape managers and the stakeholders at Mason, and she actually got approval to use this site, which was really exciting. So here's a map. You can see that the site kind of hugs this corner of Innovation Hall, and it's near some wooded area right in the heart of campus. You can see the Johnson Center base or lower level plaza right there as well. And it's right near one of the access roads. So it's a really, really great spot. They allowed us to use it because it was not visible from the road. And because, you know, the site might look a little messy. It was definitely an experiment, and we didn't want to have everybody see it to be like super public, but pedestrians can easily come and see the site as well. And it did get approved for PGF funding, or the Patriot Green Fund, which the Office of Sustainability manages. So we were able to just get things started just with volunteers and faculty support through the grant program that we manage. Next slide, please. So for permaculture, what we had to do was create a whole design for the site. And part of permaculture is basically the concept is that if you can observe your land or the area and take everything into consideration, is that you'll save a lot of time and a lot of labor by planting and designing a system. It's even beyond just plants and landscaping, but all parts of the system working together to reduce labor and to capture resources. So, you know, you can read whole books and there's even like a master level course for permaculture. There's so many techniques and tips and tricks that go into it. But the basis is that a permaculture design is specific for every site. And Wayne Wiseman recommends you observe a site for an entire year to be able to see all the vectors through every season. So by vectors, I mean sun. So you can see in this example graphic that somebody drew that the sun moves along the south hemisphere, since we're in the northern hemisphere. So the sun moves along the south from the east to the west. So you can see where that sun is pointing. You can see where the morning sun and the evening sun, in the summer, how hot it is. You're going to look at where all the shadows are moving throughout each season. If you have any water or steep inclines, if you have any animals, livestock, or chickens, any areas of flooding, areas of drought, areas that get windy, areas that have mature forest or buildings, even where people are walking, where energy and resources are flowing, are taken into consideration. So this is just an example of all the thought and observation and planning that goes into the site. Next slide. So this is our first design for the Innovation Food Forest site. We actually hired a full-time staff member. We were able to get extra funding devoted from the university and from facilities to hire a full-time staff member who was just devoted to the Innovation Food Forest. And that was around 2013, we hired John Storvik. So he actually spoke during the permaculture class, and he's kind of like an entrepreneur, permaculture expert. He used a software called AutoCAD to create these really specific designs, and that really helped our engineers and facilities to understand our plan and what we wanted to do. So you can see here how we have a main pathway that's kind of like a Y shape, all these sub pathways, and there's different dots and circles to represent the trees and the shrubs. This is a typical high level landscape design. And of course, it's kind of blended with like the permaculture concepts. And basically, John did research looking at every microclimate and every vector of every area, putting plants together and in locations where they will do best. For example, if a plant needs drought and needs full sun, you're going to put it in a place that's dry and gets full sun. If a plant prefers shade and wet areas and wet soil, you're going to put it like at the bottom of the hill where the water is more likely to collect, and where it gets a little bit more shade under a tree or near a building. So there's so much planning that goes into a landscape design. And it was really great to have a full-time staff member able to take what the student Elizabeth Torrens had just started and spend 40 hours a week coming up with this really intense design. I still have all the spreadsheets on my computer. And basically, John Storvik left the position in 2016. Around that time, he wanted to start his own farm business at home and spend time with his kids. And at that point, I was part-time, and I was hired full-time to continue the food forest, manage the other garden and the greenhouse on campus. So I kind of took over after John had already made the design and had some plants. He didn't finish the entire site or all of the walkways, but he did a lot of that original work that took so much time, and I was able to just fill in as needed. And basically the plan is in stages. So in the next slide, you can see, continuing with the history, the first stage was to create this pathway. We wanted it to be wheelchair accessible, bicycle accessible, and a really welcoming, safe, big walkway, not a sidewalk. We were hoping to have something that was more pervious to help with stormwater. And so this pathway was constructed. We had to excavate the land with machines and lay down this crushed gravel, a little bit bigger than sand. And we also put all these stormwater trenches. So in this image here, you can see that orange construction fence and all this. That's actually a trench that allows the stormwater to go down into it. And then all the rocks that go along the pathway are actually part of a French drain system. And what that means is that there's a pipe underneath that has holes, and that the water can trickle down between the rocks and move underground. What we're trying to avoid is that stormwater runoff along the surface that would take the soil and the walkway material away with it. Now, of course, years later, I'm still struggling with some stormwater issues in the pathways, but this pathway is really great, and we're really grateful to have kind of like a really nice professional installed constructed pathway for this garden, because it makes it more user-friendly and more welcoming. Absolutely. So next slide, please. So once we got the pathway constructed, we started forming beds. So in this photo here, I'm showing you the sheet mulching technique, which is a permaculture tip that I absolutely love. So if you're trying to start a garden and you have a lawn, and this whole site was just a lawn with really poor soil, sheet mulching is a really quick and easy to get to go from lawn to garden bed. And basically you lay down cardboard. You want to make sure to remove all the plastic tape, and then you lay it flat, kind of like in layers as needed. And the cardboard actually kills the grass underneath it. And then you're going to do layers of mulch. Ideally, you have some compost, leaf mulch, and then wood mulch on the top. You can even do like multiple lasagna layers, so it's multiple sheets. And then over time, the cardboard breaks down, so it's not going to impede the roots or become like a permanent obstacle for plants, but it does kill the grass initially. And then the mulch turns into a beautiful garden bed. So pretty much all the beds were made using cardboard and this sheet mulching technique. Next slide, please. So the next thing we did was sculpting the land to make berms and swales. So part of the site is pretty flat, but then half of the site is on an incline. It's kind of steep, and it's a short, small little hill, but it's still steep enough that the water would definitely rush down. So a good permaculture technique to capture water, right? Water is a great resource for plants. You don't want it to run off your site, take your soil away, and cause pollution in the streams. You want it to stay on site. So a berm is a bump, and then the swale is kind of like the hole. And they're really easy to make because you can just dig the swale and put all the soil that you took out a little bit downhill. And so you actually have this swale uphill and then the berm underhill. And these berms and swales are made on the key line. And so these are all these like complex permaculture techniques I'm telling you about. So a key line is perfectly perpendicular to the incline. So if you have an incline like this, your key line is going to be this way. So if your water, when it rains, is running down the hill, your swales and berms are in lines, and your swale is going to fill up with water, and the berm is going to stop the water from moving downhill. So you can see in the image, our swale is full of water after a storm. And I've seen this actually hold water even after a couple days of really hot summer weather without any rain. So it works really, really well. It allows the water to soak into the soil slowly and in place rather than running off like it usually would. And then we planted the berms with comfrey, clover, and poppies. That was Elizabeth Torren's original design, just to get things started. And you can see here one of our crab apple trees flowering in the spring. So we only had 2 trees on the site along with the grass that we actually left there. I'm going to talk about these plants in a minute. Go to the next slide, please. So getting the site was very flat, very empty, as you can see. We actually got a lot of complaints early on because it did not look very good. It takes a long time to build healthy soil and to buy all the plants. I mean, the list of plants was like thousands and thousands of plants we had to buy. And of course, we didn't have enough money to buy all of them or enough labor to plant them all at once. Excuse me. So we had to buy them in stages, right? We made the pathway, we made the beds, we applied some mulch, we did a few plants here and there. And we basically had to separate the site into sections and focus on each section year by year, buy some plants every year and plant them throughout the site. So the next slide, you can see some examples of volunteers during our volunteer events and shifts, helping us to dig holes and take those plants out of their pots from, we purchased them in pots from vendors and then plant them in the ground. So this definitely had to happen in stages. First, we did the fruit trees, which take the longest to grow, and then we did shrubs, and then we did some of the smaller plants as well. So next slide, please. Now you can see what the food forest looks more like recently. So here's an image, I think from like a couple years ago, but this is pretty much what the food forest would probably look like right now. So all the fruit trees are done flowering, but all of your greens are just starting to grow. But it's not too wild yet. It's just the beginning of spring. So we do have a $1,500 budget every year from the Office of Sustainability and from facilities to be able to buy mulch. We always apply fresh mulch every year to the pathways and the beds. We usually do about $1,000 of plants, either in the spring or the fall. And I've bought rocks before to make nice borders for the beds, as well as tools and supplies like gloves and shovels and fertilizer and stuff like that. So next slide, please. So in the summer, very quickly, this is what the food forest looks like every summer now that we've added so many plants. It's huge. It's very lush. We really mainly get compliments on it. People love it, although the complaints we get now is that it's overgrown. My boss would always tell me, those plants are way too happy. You need to cut them back, chop them down a little bit. So the comfrey, I'll explain the comfrey in a minute, but it grows back really quick. So you can just chop it down and then it grows right back. We constantly have to prune plants away from the walkway so that the walkways are accessible. And sometimes they get too tall. We want them to be nice and short. So typically we would be pruning constantly and pulling weeds and maintaining the site. And that's really just for aesthetics of campus. typically a permaculture site is left to go wild, and typically it would look like a forest where it's very full. You can barely walk through it. You don't really have to prune plants, but in a campus environment, we want it to be accessible and safe. In fact, I've had some students tell me it's kind of scary, like how wild it looks, but it's something that we have to learn, that nature is happy and actually producing the best when it is left wild to do its own thing. That, you know, the manicured lawns and walkways and landscapes that we're used to take a ton of labor. So we really rely, of course, on my team of staff as well as our volunteers and interns to help us maintain the site during the growing season. Next slide. We also have a storage box. So they didn't allow us to put a shed on site, but we have 2 storage boxes here that are locked, and we have some tree stumps that we have as a seating area. There's also a bench in this area. If you've never been to the food forest, I'm just giving you a sense of what it looks like. Typically for the tour or the volunteer shift, we would be meeting by this box here, and people would sign in and get their gloves on, and then I would show you around the side and show you what you can work on. So in the next slides, I'm going to show you the plants. So all the plants in the site are perennial, and what perennial means is that they're permanent, which is really sustainable and less work. You buy the plant once, you put it in the ground, and if it survives, it just gets bigger and bigger every year and produces more food for you. Compared to typical farming and most vegetables and plants we eat, they're annuals, meaning 1 year. They only grow for one life cycle. Like basil, once it flowers, it's going to die. There's nothing you can do to stop it. That's it. It goes to seed and it's done. It's not going to grow back unless you replant the seed. You have to nurse it from a baby seed all over again. So kind of like any trees in the forest, we never really like fertilize forests. You don't have to water the forest or do anything, right? It produces food for thousands of creatures and wildlife every year. And so that's the concept of the food forest, right? We're kind of imitating the forest using these perennial plants, but also producing food. So it's much less labor, less maintenance. You're going to be building the soil without any work. Typically in a garden, you're going to constantly have to add soil, add nutrients, add fertilizer. Ideally, once the design is mature, it will require less and less maintenance. There are plants that help to fertilize. The leaves will break down and create soil on its own. The food is already abundant, but of course, every year the food is going to be more and more abundant. In this photo, we have some edible daylilies. We have multiple colors, yellow, red, this gorgeous purple, and these are actually edible. So you can eat them when they're buds and they haven't bloomed yet. I've heard they're really good stir-fried. And you can also just eat them fresh. If you've never eaten a flower before, it's really good. It's a nice snack. And these daylilies, they only bloom for 1 day. So you don't have to feel guilty about picking it and eating it, because it's going to wilt and be done anyway by the evening. So if you can pick them, I like to, if I was doing the tour and these were blooming, I would offer everybody to try one. It's actually really sweet. You know, it's crunchy. Once you get to the middle where there's like the nectar, it's actually really sweet and delicious. And it kind of tastes like it smells. Like it tastes like a wonderful flower. And it's actually a really good, healthy snack. So next slide, I'm going to talk about all the, at least a lot of the different, maybe not all of them, but a lot of the different plants that we have. So comfrey, as I mentioned, I like to call it a mascot of permaculture. It's super common for permaculturists to know about comfrey and to have it in their site. And another technique of permaculture is called stacking functions. So every plant has multiple functions that it's playing in the ecosystem. So comfrey, for example, has multiple functions. First of all, the root is really medicinal. It's actually called knit bone because it can heal and knit your bones back together really quickly. In fact, I remember a staff had a broken wrist, and I gave her some comfrey salve that I made to put on it. And she told me that her doctor was shocked at how fast it healed. I mean, it was healed in like 2 weeks. You know, typically with a cast, you have it on for like 6 or 8 weeks or something. Comfrey, in fact, can help your skin cells and muscles and mainly bone, but even your skin cells to rejuvenate and heal so fast. If you try to buy it online, there's all these warning signs, because if you put it on a fresh wound, that wound might still have bacteria or dirt in it. And the comfrey causes your skin to heal so fast, it can actually trap in dirt and cause an infection. So you want to make sure if you're using comfrey salve, which is typically made from the root, to make sure that your wound is really clean, maybe a day or two already scabbed over, and then you put the salve on it, it's going to heal super fast. It's also a nutrient accumulator. In other words, it accumulates nutrients. So it actually pulls nutrients from really deep in the soil. A lot of roots are near the surface. Comfrey roots are really deep, thick tap roots, kind of like carrots. And they're going to pull up nutrients and bring them into their leaves. And then their leaves rot at the surface and bring those nutrients and make them available to other plants. So just having comfrey in your site and around your fruit trees, it's fertilizing everything for you. It also helps to break up the clay. In Virginia, we have really compact clay. We have to walk in the beds a lot to reach the plants, and that compresses it. Comfrey just kind of like tills the soil and helps to break it up. It also has beautiful flowers that kind of make this nice little spiral, and the bees and pollinators are all over the comfrey, and this flowers all summer, and it's extremely tough. You can never get rid of comfrey. I remember John Storvik kept telling me that he wanted to get rid of the comfrey because it was just supposed to be there as like a seedling plant, and there's so much of it on the berms along the incline area of the food forest, and you just can't get rid of it. Even if you dig up all the roots, if you leave even just an inch of the root, it grows right back. It's actually great. You know, you can't really do anything wrong with this plant. You could literally chop the whole thing and pull it up, and it's going to grow right back. A week or two, it's right back. So, it's a great plant to have. Next, one of my favorite plants in the food forest. The next slide, please. I don't know if it's lagging on my front. There it is. The pawpaw trees. So, a lot of people have not heard of pawpaws before. They're one of my absolute favorites. So, it's actually kind of a tropical fruit. You know, millions of years ago, this area in Virginia was a tropical ecosystem. And as it changed into more of a, you know, having a winter type climate, this tropical fruit evolved to withstand the winters. And so it is native. You'll find it wild. It's an understory tree, so it's typically shorter than like the really tall trees. And they like to grow along rivers where the soil is very wet and very nutritious. And so they have these cute little flowers right about now in early spring. They kind of like dangle down. The buds are like fuzzy. They're like this deep red velvet fuzz. They're really adorable. And then they have these tiny little blossoms that are pollinated by flies. So they don't smell very good. They have a slight stink to them, which helps to attract the flies. And so they rely on flies to pollinate. And then these little fruit form that kind of look like little like finger bananas at first when they're little. And then they form all summer. Then they ripen in September. Basically, once you start getting like a couple cold nights, they go from being really hard to all of a sudden soft. And it's one of my favorite times of year to harvest the pawpaws. I have thousands in my forest and my property here. And you just approach the tree and shake it, and all the pawpaws just fall down and go, dun, 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 dun. And you just go and pick them up, crack them open, and you can just eat the yellow custardy flesh. People compare it to a mango or banana. It's not as stringy. It's like literally like custardy. It kind of tastes like bubble gum. That's really the best way I can explain it. Although it's really good in baked goods. Like here I have an image of pawpaw bread that I made. I've done pawpaw cinnamon rolls. And they're really good when you add like cinnamon and nutmeg to it. I've even done canned pawpaw jelly, add a little bit of bourbon flavor to it. It matches really well with those kind of like Christmassy type flavors. It makes a really good Christmas gift. I have a bunch of it in my freezer, although it's really hard to separate the seeds. I don't have an image, but they have these really big black seeds you have to separate out, and you have to peel the skin. And their shelf life is like 0 to none. And that's why you never see them in stores. They can last in your fridge maybe like 7 days, maybe 2 weeks. They're going to turn darker after a day or two on your countertop. So you really have to eat them right away or spend hours processing them. So you just get the pulp and then you can freeze it or can it, or I've even made ice cream before with it, which is really common. It's really good as ice cream, and they're just super abundant. You can even go to public parks and find these as well. Next slide, please. So moving on, as if we were walking through the food forest, you can see we have a lot of fruit trees. So a lot of our fruit trees are actually dwarf, and that's going to be the peach, nectarine, plum, and apricot. So these are all your stone fruits. They're all related, right? They have that stone pit in the inside, as well as cherries too. We also have pluot trees, which is a hybrid of the plum and the apricot. So these are all grown on a dwarf rootstock. So typically a tree would get, 20 to 25 feet tall, and you can't reach the fruit, which is terrible when you're trying to harvest the fruit and you can't reach them. It's hard to climb the tree. You don't want to break the branches. So by having a dwarf tree, it never gets taller than 5 or 6 feet. So you can easily grab and reach any fruit on it whenever it's fruiting. So typically we have these gorgeous blossoms in March, which no one really got to see, but I have taken many photos of them. Some of the nectarine flowers are these deep red. That's just so gorgeous. And there's so many flowers on them. Now, we have had some challenges with them not forming fruit to the ripening stage. And I'm still trying to figure that out. Maybe it needs more fertilizer, or maybe it needs better pollination. I'm not really sure, but the fruit get like medium sized when they're really green and young, and then just fall and drop. So we haven't had peaches yet from the food forest. Although we do have peaches that ripen at the other garden behind Potomac Heights on campus. Those trees are much older, and we get thousands of organic white peaches from that site. But still trying to perfect the exactly what these trees want. The dwarf rootstock can make them a little bit weaker and more challenging and kind of finicky. So I'm still working on that. But we do get a lot of fruit. So the next slide, we do have pear trees. So these are going to be blooming white this time of year. We have 2 types of pears. European pear. I have a little image of a baby pear there. That's your typical pear shape. And then the Asian pear is the spherical pear. And what I realized with these, if you leave them on the tree, they just end up rotting and going bad. And they never ripen or soften on the tree. You actually have to pick them and allow them to soften on your countertop, basically. So we do have a lot of Asian pears that have grown to maturity in the food forest. So hopefully if you're able to come by the food forest, because it is open to the public, in the summer, you can pick some of these pears. So next slide, a really fun technique. We typically do a workshop for grafting later around this time once it warms up, late April to early May. So grafting is a really tricky horticultural technique that's kind of like tree surgery. And it basically fuses 2 branches together of similar related trees, and they heal. The veins actually fuse, because plants have veins, right? They move water nutrients up from the root, and then they move all the sugars from photosynthesis down to the root. And so just like our blood moves, with oxygen up and down our body, plants also have veins that move nutrients and water and sugar up and down. So with grafting, you have to match those veins just right, and then wrap it and keep the moisture in so that it heals. And just like a heart transplant surgery, those veins fuse together and they become one. And you can actually make, they call them cocktail fruit trees, where you have different colored flowers and different fruits on different branches of the tree. Like you can have a peach, nectarine, plum, pluot, cherry, all on one tree, and when they flower, it's really cool to see the different colored flowers. But grafting is useful because it's the only way to get the exact same DNA, and that's because these fruit trees, they need pollen, right? We need bees to cross-pollinate to be able to have that fruit form. So whenever you plant a seed of a fruit, it's actually the recombined genes of possibly multiple fruits. And you never know what you're going to get when you plant a fruit seed. Of course, it's going to take years for that tree to actually form fruit. It might not even form fruit. It might just not be viable because the genes recombined were so different that that tree could be sterile, or the fruit could be so amazing, something like the pluot that never existed before. You could name it after yourself and put it on the market and make a bunch of money. But if you wanted to sell that exact fruit that you developed, you couldn't plant it from seed. What you do is you cut off a scion or a branch that's dormant over the winter, and then you fuse it onto another tree, maybe one that you did grow from seed, and that's how you know you get the exact same type of tree. So for example, we have the Eldorado peach. In order to get the Eldorado peach, you have to get that scion of that Eldorado peach and put it onto a dwarf rootstock. So that's how all of our dwarf fruit trees were formed, is from grafting. And so we have these 2 crabapple trees on campus. Crabapples, technically edible, but they're really hard and really sour and chalky, astringent, so you don't really want to eat them, and they're really tiny. But it's related to apples. So what I did was I typically will in February purchase scions or branches from a local apple orchard, and they're all dormant. You have to keep them in the fridge until it warms up in late April. And I also cut off some limbs. So you can see this image here of one of my former interns and staff, Alex, helping us to graft. So you can cut about 1/3 of a tree's branches without killing it, and then that leaves that whole stump. And the veins are actually along the perimeter. Just like our veins are underneath our skin, they're not in our center of our bones. The tree's veins are along the perimeter. And so what you do is you just make a little cut, and you peel back the bark a little bit, and you make a cut on your scion, and you slip it into the edge of the bark of the limb that you cut. And then you're going to wrap it in grafting tape, which is like a waxy material. You kind of warm it in your hand, and it's stretchy, and that helps to capture the moisture so the plant doesn't wilt and die. And then over time, it actually heals and fuses. And so now the 2 crabapple trees that we have on site are covered in these weird-looking tiny branches on the limbs that we cut that are slowly getting bigger and bigger and replacing those branches we cut. And a lot of them have survived. Not all of them take, about 50% of your grafts are going to fail. It's very finicky, tricky process. But it's really exciting when you see them actually leaf, and maybe starting next year, they might actually flower in the spring and actually have apple fruit on your crabapple trees, which would be really cool. We would have multiple different types of apples on the tree, like green apples or Granny Smith, yellow and red. We even have some red-fleshed apple scions that we planted. So hopefully in a few years, we'll actually get some apples that we get to eat from our crabapple trees. We also have this image of a Bradford pear, which are invasive pear trees that bloom white in the spring. A few weeks ago, they're everywhere. You see them all over the roadways. They're spiky. They don't really produce fruit. And so I was able to graft on an edible, useful pear onto the Bradford pear stump. So when the tree is young, you can also chop the whole thing down and put your scion grafts along the stump. You don't have to have a whole mature tree either. Next slide, please. So a couple other trees we have on site, the redbud tree, which they almost just finished blooming now, but for the past several weeks recently, in early spring, they're blooming everywhere. You see them in every forest along the roadways, and they're like this bright pink, magenta, purple. They're so gorgeous. They're actually in the legume family, like with beans and peas, and so they fix nitrogen. Later in the summer, you'll see that all these flowers turn into looks like little bean pods. So they're very helpful for the environment. They are fertilizing the other trees around them, and these flowers are actually edible. They kind of taste like kind of sour, like vinegary, but they are edible. I actually picked some earlier this spring, and I put them in some summer rolls. So it's a nice kind of like salad green. It adds some nice color to your dishes. And then once they start forming their leaves later in the spring, like they're just forming now, they're these gorgeous heart-shaped leaves. And so these trees are also very close to my heart. Absolutely love them. And I love seeing them bloom this time of year as well. Next slide, please. Some other trees we have are the persimmons. So we have the American and Asian persimmon. There are wild types as well that are really tiny and like really astringent and chalky when you eat them. So the varieties we have are cultivated. So they're bred naturally to be bigger and tastier. So these are much larger trees. They can get pretty tall. I'm trying to like prune them and keep them short because you can't reach all the fruit when they're really tall. But these fruits are really cool because they ripen in the freezing cold. In like November and December is when you'll find these fruits soft and ready to eat, which is just super cool to have these like orange fruits just like dangling on the tree around like Halloween, and then getting to eat fruit like in November and December. It's really awesome. And you can also find them wild in the forest. They are native to Virginia. So next slide, please. So one of the last trees we have, oh, do we skip the fig tree slide? Go back one slide. I guess it's missing. I may have moved. I think I moved it last minute. So maybe the fig tree will be later on in the shrubs category. So to start the shrubs, we have our elderberries. So we only plan to have like a few elderberries in the garden, but they spread like crazy. They can spread via the root or rhizome, so they have little babies around them. Or they also spread by seed because the birds love eating them, and then the birds fly and poop around, and then those seeds that they poop actually grow into new elderberries. So these are shrubs that are woody, and that means that they're going to get bigger and taller every year because their branch survives the winter, but it's not like a whole tree. So it doesn't have that stalk or trunk in the middle. It's got multiple branches coming from the base. These are really, really medicinal. You don't really want to eat them raw. The stems and the raw berries can actually do contain cyanide. I've actually eaten too many raw berries and had a little bit of like a headache, but they're pretty tasty. Well, really, they're not that good. When you first eat them, they're kind of nasty. I've grown a taste for them because they're actually pretty juicy and a nice sugar content when you're hungry. But typically the flowers are used in drinks. They're super pretty. I like to use them as like face decoration because the flowers fall and they're flat and white. You can like stick them to your face, and like they're really fun to play with. People have made sodas and drinks out of the elderflower. And then when the berries form late spring, early summer, you can harvest them. I have a bunch of them in my freezer. My chickens absolutely love eating them. You can either ferment them to get rid of the cyanide, or typically you're going to cook them down and make a syrup. And so elderberry syrup you can find at the pharmacy or grocery store. It's pretty common. It's really great for kids going to daycare where they might be exposed to a lot of other diseases. Can really help during flu season. It basically helps to boost your immune system, so you're more likely to fight off the disease, and your cold will only last like a couple of days. You'll get over your sickness much quicker when taking elderberry internally. So next slide, I'm going to talk to you about some more shrubs. We have blueberries. So blueberries come in two varieties, low bush and high bush. So the low bush are pretty low, of course. The high ones are a little bit taller, but they don't get taller than like usually like 5 or 6 feet when they're mature. Blueberries are acid-loving shrubs, so they really like to grow near pine trees. I actually have to buy special fertilizer for them to make their soil more acidic, or else they won't be very happy. They bloom in the spring. They have these really cute little flowers that are buzz pollinated. So the bee actually has to go from underneath and like buzz to release the pollen and pollinate the fruits. And then the berries will ripen in the summer. Although what usually happens at the food forest is that the birds come and eat all the berries before we can get to them, because we wait till they ripen, and the birds just eat them when they're green. So I haven't had many blueberries that we get to eat from the food forest. I've tried fencing them off. Typically, permaculture will tell you if you can just grow enough to share with the wildlife, then you don't really have to keep the wildlife away. Ideally, these shrubs will get to the point where they're mature enough to grow food for people and wildlife. And then in the fall, their leaves turn this really pretty red, and so they're also attractive at other times of the year. Next slide, please. We also have dwarf thornless raspberry, which is really cool. Blackberries and raspberries are typically really thorny, really invasive, actually, around fences and things. Wild blackberries just take over, and they're so thorny and really crazy to get rid of. So in the food forest, we have thornless varieties, which is really useful because you don't have to get hurt by picking them. So here's an example of the leaves of the raspberry right about now, when the leaves are just starting to grow back, but these are perennial shrubs. So those vines or canes as they're called, are going to get bigger and longer, and they regrow as well. And these berries are just like the berries you would get at the grocery store. They're big and juicy, and they taste just like raspberries. They're so good. But of course, there's like no labor involved. You just go and harvest them. And the dwarf raspberries are like 2 feet tall, so they're really easy to maintain, and it's really fantastic that they're thornless. So that's a really cool one. If you're able to get to the food forest in July, there's so many berries to harvest. Next slide, please. So echinacea is another, it's actually more of a perennial. So all these plants are perennial, they're permanent, right? But when we have trees and then shrubs and then perennials, we are using that term to discuss shrubs and plants that are going to die back. So the root is perennial, but in the winter you won't see the plant. It's just the root that survives the winter, and it has to grow back every year. So a lot of the plants in the food forest are like this. So they're not really shrubs, and they're not really annuals. So they're perennial. So echinacea is one of those. It's also known as coneflower, and they flower in the summer. They're really pretty, and the root is medicinal. So if you had this plant mature for a few years, you could actually harvest some of the root. It's usually chopped and dried, and this also really helps to boost your immune system. Typically, you can make a tincture with alcohol and take that medicinally to help fight off diseases and prevent the spread of disease. Really gorgeous flower as well. So next slide, please. Oh, if you were to walk in the food forest right now, it is covered in this golden ragwort. Absolutely gorgeous. Actually, a lot of students take their graduation photos this time of year because the green and gold matches George Mason's colors. And it's beautiful. So they're about 2 or 3 feet tall, and they bloom this time of year. Typically, it's a very short ground cover, and it's very shade loving and very easily spread and very tolerant. So it's really great if you have a really shady backyard and nothing's growing. Now it is native, but it does tend to like take over. When it goes to seed, those seeds are going to blow with the wind and spread everywhere. And it also spreads via the root. So it's spread throughout the food forest. It's not edible, but it is native, and it's absolutely gorgeous. So aesthetic is still a value, one of those stacking functions, especially on a campus landscape. We want the site to look pretty, and there's still so much value for having beauty in a landscape, even though it might not produce food. So if you are picking food in the food forest, you want to know what you're looking for. Make sure that you're harvesting it properly. You don't want to kill the plant. Make sure you share the produce with others, and make sure you know what you're looking for. You're not just going to want to eat any flower, for example. So next slide. They're probably done by now, but in early spring, we would also have the daffodils blooming. So these are, again, not edible, but really pretty. And they do serve a function as well. They're planted in a circle around each fruit tree. So another permaculture technique is called a guild. And a guild is when you have plants that are in a group together that are supporting one another. So the daffodils bloom the same time as the fruit trees are blooming, and it basically helps to attract pollinators so that we can get more pollination, so we can actually have some fruit forming later in the season. And I always tell students and visitors, when you're in the food forest, you have to stop and smell the flowers. It is absolutely worth it. And I'll get on my hands and knees all the way down just to smell the daffodils. It is so worth it. It smells amazing. We have all different colors and varieties. Here's like your typical yellow one, but we also have like the white ones with some pink in there. There's like coral pinks. They're absolutely gorgeous. Some of my favorite that bloom. One of the first things that's going to be blooming in early spring and early March. I get so excited about all the daffodils. They're also very common landscaped on campus as well because they're so resilient and they bloom so early in the season. So the next slide, we have another bulb that is edible. And that's called Camassia. So no one's really ever heard of this plant before, and you don't want to harvest it quite yet. I planted it a few years ago, but basically kind of like a garlic would and an onion would bunch and form new bulbs each year underground. It gets bigger and covers a larger area. So eventually you can actually cut and harvest some of the bulbs. As long as you leave other bulbs still in the ground, it will grow back. and form more bulbs. So I've never eaten these before, but I guess they are edible. And they bloom this time of year. They're super gorgeous. So the food forest is just covered in purple and gold right about now. And then these plants take advantage of the early spring when the trees are not leafy. So there's a lot more sunlight getting to the forest floor. After the spring, you're not going to see these plants. You won't know they exist. They're just going to be dormant bulbs underground. But they flower first, and then their leaves stick around so they can photosynthesize. They put all that sugar and energy into their roots so they can grow more tubers, and those tubers are going to grow all summer underground and all winter as well. They only come up out of the ground in early spring. So it's nice to enjoy them. Next slide. One of my other favorites is the moss phlox. So most of the year it looks like kind of like a moss, but it likes the sun. And then in early spring it has these gorgeous blossoms. So this is one moss phlox plant. It was formerly like a 4x4 inch pot that I put in the ground, and it just spreads and takes over as a ground cover. So it's very short, no taller than like 6 inches, and absolutely gorgeous. In fact, these flowers are really soft. Rub my face on them when they're blooming. And yes, I do these silly things at the food forest all the time because I love plants and I want people to experience plants and experience the joy that it can bring people. There is some scientific evidence that even just looking at a plant or tree for a few seconds lowers your blood pressure and increases your sense of well-being. So even these plants that are not edible, but just beautiful and fun to experience, and the fact that it's a ground cover also prevents stormwater issues too. Next slide, please. Some of my other favorite plants are the steppables. So here's one plant called steppable oregano. We also have steppable thyme as well. These are typically really short plants. I think this one gets to like 6 or 8 inches, but some of them are like even like really tiny, like half an inch tall, and they smell really, really good. And some of them are edible. So you can actually add them to dishes when you're cooking. Next slide shows some other culinary herbs and, steppables first. So steppables are literally steppable, right? You can step on them. They can tolerate foot traffic. They're really great alternative for lawns because you don't need to mow them and you don't really need to fertilize them as much. And they also creep along the ground around rocks. So they can make a really nice pathway as shown in this photo. In the next slide, I think I have the culinary herbs, which we have so many of in multiple locations throughout the garden. So if you're on your way home, walking through the food forest after class, you can quickly grab and harvest a few of these herbs and then bring them in your kitchen and cook with them. So the mint is really good if you're making mojitos or drinks, can help with headaches and upset stomach. The sage is really good in soups and other dishes. We also have rosemary that we've grown, although it's tricky, it doesn't always survive the winters. We usually dig it up and put it in the greenhouse over the winter and then put it back outside in the spring. And then our garlic and onion chives as well. In the next slide, I have some more images. Really, they're evergreen. So even in the winter, you can find onion and garlic chives, and they're very common in the wild in the forest. I usually tell people it's a really good survival food. All the alliums or garlic and onion family plants are edible. So if you pick it and it smells garlicky, you can be confident that it's safe to eat. So this is going to be very easy to identify in the food forest. I do have some signs, as you saw on the previous slide. Now the onion chives, the leaves are literally like a tube. So if you pick it, you'll notice it's hollow and it smells like onion. They're pretty good to eat raw if you don't mind having onion breath. You can chop them like onion chives or like scallions. I love cooking with them. I've been harvesting wild garlic and onion from my yard and adding that into my dishes. You can cook with it just like an onion or garlic you would buy from the store and chop up, or you can add it as like a topping, raw and things like that. They're also really, really nutritious. A lot of vitamin C and other nutrients. The garlic chives are going to have a flat leaf, so that's how you can tell them apart. And they're a little bit spicier if you eat them raw, but packed with vitamins and nutrients. So good for you. Always growing, always ready to harvest. And they also flower later in the summer. And you can actually also cook and eat with the flowers. And the bees love the flowers. They're just really fragrant and great for pollinators. So next slide, please. We have even more medicinal plants you may not have heard of, like yarrow. So yarrow is typically used medicinally as a tea, and it can actually help women with menstrual cramps as a tea. You can also crush the leaves, what's called a poultice. You can just put it right on your wound. And yarrow is wild. It grows in the forests. They used it during the Civil War for like really deep wounds. So you can just put that right onto a really bad deep wound. It's going to help stop the bleeding, potentially save your life, help to heal wounds and stuff like that. We have multiple colors. So typically the native version is yellow. We also have some pinks and reds and purples as well. They're really pretty and have these kind of like fern-like fluffy leaves to them. Next slide. We have passion flower, one of my favorites. So I think I forgot to mention in permaculture, we try to use all spaces. So we have underground roots and tubers that are edible. Then we're going to have our small ground covers and small perennials, and then shrubs, and then understory trees, and then tall trees. And then we also have vines. They're going to climb and fill the space as well. So you're not wasting any space. You have food everywhere, ideally, in permaculture. And so the passion fruit vines actually die back completely in the winter. And you won't see them grow back in the root until like late May. Once it starts getting like really hot, that's when you'll see the passion fruit come up. Their leaves kind of look like dinosaur feet. So this vine is really nice because it will climb anything you give it. It has those tendrils. They're going to loop and wrap. I like to like kind of like grab them with my finger. They fit right on your finger. They'll grab onto fences and buildings and things. But what's great is that they're not going to tear down a tree or building. Unlike grapevines, like wild grapevine and invasive kudzu vines that cover forests are gonna, or poison ivy, it's gonna climb the tree and they can actually pull down and kill trees. They can, because they're woody. Once they climb something, they get thicker and they stay up there. And they can actually cause a lot of damage for buildings. On the other hand, the passion fruit, that whole vine is going to die back and you can just rip it out as a dead vine. It's going to grow back and it grows huge. Every summer, these grow in the food forest. They climb the elderberry bushes and they get all over the sidewalk. I have to keep them controlled, and their flowers are gorgeous, like to die for gorgeous. They smell amazing. The pollinators love them. These flowers are edible. You can actually use the tea as the leaves as a tea, although usually I don't eat the flower because the fruit is incredible. The fruit literally tastes like candy. They take a long time to ripen. So all summer you'll see the flowers, you'll see the green fruit. They ripen. When they ripen, they turn kind of like wrinkly and yellowish in like the fall time. And you're just going to crack it open, and kind of like a pomegranate, each seed has like a pocket of juice around it. So when you eat them, it's kind of like juice that bursts in your mouth, and then that crunchy seed that's edible, you kind of like to chew on. It's crunchy, but it is so good. You think that passion fruit is mainly tropical, and there are red passion fruits that are tropical, but this is actually a hardy version that survives the winter, and it's so awesome to have it in the food forest. These types of plants in the food forest are really abundant and really happy. So if you want, and I can show you if you volunteer with us, you can actually dig up and take home one of the roots and the vines as a propagule, and you can take it home and propagate it, meaning grow it instead of from seed, which takes forever and is really fragile. You can take a part of the plant and the root and replant it in your yard or indoors, and you can actually propagate and take some of these plants home with you. As long as they're abundant and thriving in the food forest, you can take a piece of it and replant them when you go home. Just a really cool thing about plants is that they are so abundant and can regrow really easily from other plant parts. So the next slide, I'm just going to go through a bunch of other plants. Oh, here's the fig tree. It was a little bit out of order. Fig trees are barely able to survive our climate. We've had a couple really cold winters in the past where the branches have died back. We try to put rocks around the base that hold on to the heat of the sun to keep it warm. What's interesting about fig trees is that they don't blossom. There are no actual visible flowers, and traditionally they're pollinated via wasps that lay their eggs in the fruit, but most cultivated figs are self-fertile, and they're really delicious. So all season they'll be covered in little green fruits, but then in the fall when students come back for the semester, they start to turn purple and soften and ripen, and you just pick them, and they're kind of sticky, but you can still eat it without rinsing, and they're really good. If you've never had a fresh fig before, it's an amazing experience. You can kind of relate it to like a fig Newton, but the flavor is just so much more fresh and pure and really delicious. So hopefully you get to come by and taste some of these fruits one day. Next slide. I think I have some more flowers. Oh, some more fruits. Alpine strawberries are another one of my favorites. They're really tiny flowers. Most strawberries are going to spread, and they're really big and take so many weeks to ripen. But the alpine strawberry is more like a smaller, like clumping version, and they're going to fruit all season. Typical strawberries take weeks and only ripen in June typically. The alpine strawberries ripen really quick, and they're just super abundant all season long, all spring, all summer, all fall, everything like it really except for like the winter time. You're getting these little tiny berries. They seem tiny, and sometimes they're ripened when they're white as well. We have some white alpine strawberries, but once you pick them and taste them, you're like, whoa, it's like candy. It tastes like artificial strawberry. It's amazing, like out of this world flavor. It's nothing like store-bought strawberries that have like a lot of like white to them, and like, yeah, it tastes like a strawberry. It's a good flavor, but it's nothing like these tiny alpine strawberries. The flavor is just like so packed in there, and you can imagine what you're tasting is also the nutrition that's really concentrated and really good for you. Next slide, please. Ooh, bee balm is another really great herb. It can get pretty tall, like 3 or 4 feet tall. It blooms in the summer. It's another one of those perennials. In the winter, it dies back. We have to cut back all the dead stems. And in the spring, the root grows back. It's a highly medicinal herb, also known as Medarda. You can actually just pick the leaves and add it to your water bottle and just shake it around, and it helps to get rid of headaches. So you don't have to rely on anti-inflammatory medicine to get rid of your headache or cramps. You can just walk to the food forest and pick some of these herbs. You don't even need hot water to make the tea. You can do like a cold brew in your water bottle. These are really great to attract pollinators. We've had hummingbirds attracted to the red ones, but even the purple ones, we've seen these really cool, these are called hummingbird moths that we've seen, and they literally look like a hummingbird, but they're actually an insect, and it's a moth. And it's just super cool. They sound like hummingbirds and it looks like a hummingbird, but it's actually a moth. So that's really cool to see. We have all kinds of wildlife in the food forest as well. Next slide, please. Saffron crocus is a really gorgeous flower. Most crocuses bloom really early spring, but the saffron crocus actually blooms in the fall, in October. And it's only blooming for 1 week, so it's a really short window. This is why the saffron herb is so expensive. You have to get all your laborers in the field during this short time period, and they have to harvest every stamen, which is that red part of the flower that they turn into saffron, by hand. And those little red things are actually the stamens that hold the pollen, and you have to pick each one to get saffron. So we do have these growing in the food forest. If you like cooking with saffron and you're on campus and you're checking weekly in October, you can come by and pick the saffron yourself. You know, when you buy it, it's like a tiny little packet like this big full of the saffron herb and very expensive. So you can actually get them for free on campus. Next slide, please. We have a ton of flowers that bloom in the summer. The black-eyed Susan, also known as Rudbeckia, are native, absolutely gorgeous, one of my favorite flowers. Not really edible, but really beautiful, and they spread in a clump. The iris flower, so some of these plants were gifted to us. For example, if they're building a new building on campus, they have to rip up the existing landscaping and plants, and they would usually just throw them out. But if they let me know, I can actually grab them and then I plant them in the food forest. So a lot of these plants are not edible, were not in the original design, but we've saved them and they were gifted to us, like this iris flower, which are absolutely gorgeous, but do not eat them by any means. Iris flowers are insanely poisonous and toxic, although they are absolutely gorgeous. So next slide, please. New England aster, I get asked about a lot. People send me photos like, what is this plant in the food forest? It's gorgeous. We have it in multiple areas like most plants. And so in the fall, September, October, these short dwarf bushes are everywhere throughout the food forest, blooming with these gorgeous purple colors. Some of them are also pink. And these petals are actually edible. So you can rip off the petals and eat them. The garden club, we did a really cool trick where you put edible petals into ice cubes, and then you can use them in your cocktails or drinks or mocktails, as we like to call them. And it's just a really fun way to kind of like spice up your drink and take edible flowers into a fun format that you can drink. And then once the ice melts, you can kind of like chew and nibble on the petals. And it's really cool because they're all different colors and really pretty. Just a really fun edible out there. Next slide, please. What else do we have? We have ferns in the food forest as well. They're shade-loving, native, edible. Those little fiddleheads in the spring when the plant first grows and comes up are edible as well. They're good raw. You can also saute them and eat them. Next slide, please. So there are a lot of weeds in the garden. We have a whole weeding manual that we're still developing, my staff and I. We usually prioritize our weeds. So that word weed is relative, right? It just means that a plant is in the wrong place. But a lot of really common weeds that people would usually spray with herbicide to kill and they hate them are actually really medicinal and useful. So these weeds are the lowest on our priority list because we don't usually pull them. We just let them grow because they're so useful. And plantain is one of my favorites. Every opportunity I get to teach people about plantain, I do. And no, it's not that banana you think and know of as plantain. It's actually a low to the ground, small perennial plant. You know, it grows back each spring. And these leaves have these really unique veins, which are helpful for identifying. You can see how the veins kind of come from the stem and go throughout the leaf. You want to know how to identify this plant because if you have a bee sting, you do not have to be in pain. Just find some plantain. You're going to pick the leaf. You can brush off some dirt. It's not going to hurt you. You're actually going to chew the leaf. It is edible. Tastes like grass, so it's not really that tasty. But if you chew it, you turn it into a poultice. And you're basically breaking apart the cells of the leaf that allow that medicine to come out. You're going to spit out the gooey poultice mess and hold it onto your bee sting or bug bite. And the pain is gone in seconds. It's amazing. So if I get a wasp sting, I'm like, ah, and I'm like looking for plantain, chewing it as fast as I can, and it's like, ah, and the astringency of the leaves actually pulls out the toxin from the bee sting or bug bite and causes immediate relief. So it's really useful. A lot of students don't believe me. They're like, you want me to do what? You want me to chew this instead? They're like, oh, and then they're like, whoa, that works. My pain is gone. So it's really, really great. Next slide. Well, we also have some other weeds like dandelion and the purple nettle, like the pictured here, chickweed. There's so many weeds in the spring and throughout the year that are edible. If you don't know, dandelion flowers, root, and leaves are edible and medicinal. So next slide. We're just going to breeze through the last bit of this. The food forest is a really great resource for students and faculty. Here's an image of a drawing class. They're actually learning how to draw flowers. We have some roses, which smell amazing, nothing like store-bought roses. If you see the roses blooming, you have to stop and smell them. But I've had other like ecosystem ecology classes come into the food forest, observing pollinators, doing different kinds of lessons. Even just any classroom, it's really nice to have an outdoor space with like living material to actually learn from. Next slide, please. We also have compost piles at the food forest. We actually typically have multiple piles. So I separated one pile into 3. And so we kind of have like one big one and 3 tiny ones going right now. But typically we turn the compost every season. And all the weeds that we pull, we put into the compost, any branches that we prune so they don't go to the trash. So composting is a really great sustainable way to turn your waste into a renewable product that returns nutrients and fertilizer to the soil. These are also considered community compost piles. So anybody can bring their waste from their household, like eggshells, bread, leftovers, cardboard, coffee grounds, veggie scraps. You want to avoid really like heavy oil or like heavy dairy. Never pour like rotten milk into the compost, just because that can attract, or meat and bones, that can attract rodents and raccoons that we don't want on campus. But otherwise, you can bring it to the food forest, add it to the pile, and so that reduces your carbon footprint, and it's also going to help our compost to break down faster and provide more nutrients to our plants. We also have a program going on for our zero waste part of our office, where we're collecting coffee grounds, from the campus Starbucks and Einstein's, and as well as the pizza boxes from Blaze Pizza and the Johnson Center, and breaking those down in the compost, which has really helped our piles to create soil faster for us. So it's a really great program that you can typically volunteer for and learn more about composting as well. Absolutely key to having any kind of sustainable garden. You have to have a compost. Absolutely crucial. Next slide. We're almost done here. I'm sorry, I'm going a little bit over than I anticipated, but I just want to let you know that we do have a website. So if you go to green.gmu.edu, which is the Office of Sustainability's webpage, you can navigate to campus, gardens, you can find information on the food forest, as well as our greenhouse and other garden on campus. We do have a partial plant inventory. So a lot of what I went over today, that information is currently available online. We have like some timeline stories. We have a video about how to compost on campus. We have our link to volunteer, which hopefully will get started later in the season. We also have some more videos and things for you and other resources. So we will be posting this video online for you to share with your friends and watch later. Hopefully next week we'll be able to post it. And just for my final slide to show you the overall design again of the food forest. And to say thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm available for any questions. Oh, somebody asked, how can I volunteer? So if you go to our website and click on that volunteer image, that will send you to our signups website where you can create an account and register for our volunteer shifts. Unfortunately, because of the COVID-19 virus, we are not hosting any volunteer shifts. But as soon as it is safe to, we will be hosting volunteer shifts as soon as we are able to. Oh, and Lynn posted the link there. Thank you very much. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you attending. Hopefully you'll be able to see the food forest if you haven't already and get to volunteer with us. Otherwise, there's plenty of resources online. I also actually did record some videos when I was on campus in the food forest. It's kind of just me walking around and showing the plants and talking about them, similar to this slideshow, but a video of me actually on site. So if you're interested, you can find that on YouTube under my name, Doni Nolan. It's on my personal YouTube account. There's 4 different videos, it's about 40 minutes long. So there's plenty of resources for you. And hopefully you are inspired to wild forage from your forest in your backyard or in your public park nearby. Even with the pandemic, hopefully you can still go out and enjoy some nature. Be sure to stop and smell the flowers and enjoy some edible plants. Enjoy the food forest. Enjoy the food in forests in general, because this is really what makes food sustainable, is growing it the way nature intended, by composting, renewing our waste, growing with perennials, just like a forest with low maintenance, allowing nature to feed us. So hopefully you are inspired. Thank you so much for joining us. If you would like to turn on your audio or video and ask me any questions, I'll hang around for a couple more minutes. Otherwise, you are free to go and sign off. Thank you so much for attending and listening. I really appreciate it. And happy Earth Week, happy Earth Month. Hopefully you're getting outside and enjoying the beautiful weather. Thank you so much for watching.